Bark, to make known by persistent outcry. The Pacific Northwest timber wars of the 1980s and 90s fractured communities along ideological lines and sowed immense public distrust of federal land management agencies. Founded in the wake of that traumatic period, Bark quickly established itself as a watchdog and protector of the lands known as Mount Hood National Forest. Over the years, Bark built a large supporter base through its many victories protecting the forest from destructive logging and exploitation by corporate interests. Over the last 24 years, Bark has gone through many changes in its staff, programs, and volunteer base, but at our core, we remain the same. We prioritize connection to place and believe in the transformative power of people who are directly engaged in the issues that affect their lives. Through our talks, trainings, guided hikes, restoration work, and forest and wetland surveys, Bark works to create a place-based community of individuals bound together by a love of nature and a desire to nurture it.
Bark rose to prominence in Portland because of its reputation as a tireless watchdog for the forest, and we still take that job seriously. With our ground truthing program, volunteers survey areas proposed as part of Forest Service timber projects, gathering valuable information that allows us to check existing conditions and give specific and informed input to agency staff during project planning. But that's not all we do. Bark also provides volunteer-powered, on-the-ground data collection, which contributes to wetland and beaver habitat restoration, increasing landscape resiliency in a changing climate. Poor funding, staffing, and bureaucracy can limit the pace and scale of restoration work for our partners at the U.S. Forest Service, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Portland Parks and Recreation, and Institute of Natural Resources. But through grants and community funding, Bark organizes our volunteer base to fill gaps and ensure that our partners do what is best for the ecosystem and the communities which depend on it. Through our programs, Bark works to increase the community's understanding and appreciation of beavers and wetlands. We provide volunteer opportunities in the field as well as in Portland, with a goal of providing several levels of accessibility so that all interested community members may participate. Through these hands-on experiences, our community members develop a connection to place, which strengthens their desire to nurture and protect the ecosystems on which we all depend. With all this in mind, why don't you join me on a wetland mapping verification field day? So we've never been to this area before, and it's labeled as a palustrine area, forested. And as you can see, there are many trees, but there's also this lower shrubby area, as well as some peat that we just found next to this little creek. So one of the things that we want to look at is how far down this peat layer goes in order to be technically classified as a peat bog and receive the protections under a peat bog classification. It has to be 40 centimeters or deeper. So let's check it out. We've reached our 40 centimeter mark, and we do indeed have peat all the way at the bottom. It's more decomposed than the things at the top, but it definitely counts as a greater than 40% organic fibrous material, which is great. This means we can classify this area as a peat bog, and that gives it way more protections. One of the main things that we look at during our wetland mapping verification days is the water regime. We're given by our wetland scientist, Kyla, a water regime number, which is from the Cowardin classification. This B right here means that this area is typically seasonally saturated, which means the substrate is saturated at or near the surface for extended periods during the year. But we found this peat layer, which indicates a totally different hydrologic regime. This peat layer can only exist under near constant saturation year-round, which is pretty exciting because that means that we can change this area's classification from a B to a D. Additionally, on our map, we are in this middle part right here underneath the B, where there's no blue line, there's no stream mapped, but we found a small running stream. So that's something that we add to our wetland maps as well. Clues that this could be an old beaver dam are the surrounding plants. We have alder, spirea, and others that beaver really like to eat. Beaver chew is easily recognizable by the conical shape and the 45-degree angle, including the teeth marks of the beaver chew. This is a pretty big one, but there are often smaller ones where you'll see not the conical shape, but the 45-degree angle complete with teeth marks. There's another conical one as well. Since these are conifer trees, they're most likely used to build the dam and not used for food. And surrounding this beaver chew are other beaver foods, such as Oregon ash and alder. It's no surprise that many of beavers' favorite foods grow in wetlands, but oftentimes the thing that keeps beavers out of a location is the lack of these foods. In Forest Service areas, this is often the encroachment of conifers. You can tell by this small conifer that this area is drying out enough for trees to grow, which is not always a great sign for beaver. BARC beaver habitat restoration goals, including beaver dam analog or BDA installations, would increase the water on these landscapes, pushing these conifers out and creating more of this awesome wetland and beaver habitat.
BARC focuses on the forests, ecosystems, and communities that are connected to, part of, and surrounding Mount Hood National Forest. And while BARC was originally founded with a focus on Mount Hood National Forest, we now recognize that the ecosystem doesn't end at the National Forest boundary, and neither should our work. The inherent interconnectedness of species, communities, and ecosystems encourages us to dissolve, expand beyond, and leave behind artificial ownership boundaries.
BARC hopes to be a resource organization that utilizes volunteer power to compile meaningful data which can be shared with scientists, land managers, and organizations that may not have the capacity to gather themselves. In doing so, we'll be taking substantive steps towards increasing climate resiliency in the ecosystems and communities surrounding Mount Hood. Simultaneously, we hope to be a regional example of an organization that weaves together Western science with environmental justice, continuously shedding light on issues caused by colonial conservation perspectives, recognizing the paradox of practicing conservation on stolen lands, and boosting the voices of Indigenous thought leaders across our region.
With funding from 99 Girlfriends, BARC will be able to build our capacity for restoration work within wetlands and other beaver-modified habitats to improve climate resilience, water storage, and biodiversity. By restoring landscapes and communities fractured by the commodification of nature, we can work to build a future grounded in respect and guided by reciprocity.